This is actually a continuation of the Special Senses recording, narrated PowerPoint for HO150. Again, I am your instructor, Alice Shapiro, and this will conclude by giving an overview of hearing and balance. All right, so we're going to take a look at parts of the structures of the ear, the external or outer ear. This gives you a description of it. The auricle, which is the part we often call the ear, is the fleshy part that we see on the outside. And also part of the external ear is the external auditory meatus and the tympanic membrane. Let's go on to the next slide, which will show you more of the ear structures, or at least define the ear structures. The middle ear is the air-filled chamber. And I don't know what's happening with my computer. I apologize if the screen went bluey for a moment. The malleus or hammer is one of the three bones of the middle ear, the malleus, incus, and stapes, named hammer, anvil, and stirrup for their shape, their physical shape, resemble those structures. Notice that the stapes is the bone located at the base of the oval window. We'll talk more about these as we look at the mechanisms of hearing. The oval window separates the middle and inner ear. The eustachian or auditory tube opens into the pharynx, and you can equalize the air pressure between outside and inside air because of this structure, because between the outside air and middle ear. Here is a diagram of the ear structures, the external, middle, and inner ear. And we'll be talking about the functions of these structures momentarily. The inner ear is a set of fluid-filled chambers, and the bony labyrinth are tunnels filled with fluid. Three regions, bony regions, the cochlea, the vestibule, and the semicircular canals. There is also a membranous labyrinth, which is inside of the bony labyrinth and filled with endolymph. Here is a description of what endolymph is and what perilymph is. The cochlea is actually a snail shell-shaped structure, and this is where the actual sensation of hearing or perception of hearing actually is in the temporal lobe, but this is where the sensation, the impulses for hearing, are actually generated and actually take place in the cochlea, where the sound waves, we could say, from the external and middle ear, from the tympanic membrane, are translated into nerve impulses, which will then be sent to the temporal lobe of our brains, and we will detect hearing. These are some other structures involved with hearing in the cochlea, and we'll take a look at what their functions are and make sure you understand what their functions are. More of the definitions of what these structures are, and we'll put this all together in just a moment. All right. So in this diagram, this is an important diagram to study. There's several parts to this diagram. This showing you the structures of the cochlea, semicircular canals, the bony parts, as well as the membranous labyrinths. Here is a portion of the cochlear nerve. So the impulses that are generated here are transmitted via the cochlear nerve. Here is another cross section of the inner lining of the bony labyrinth, and here is the membranous labyrinth, which occurs interior to that. The vestibular membrane and hair cells. We will see how hair cells with their microvilli are important to the sensation of hearing. There is a diagram like this in your textbook. Make sure you spend some time with it. All right, how do we hear? We've looked at some of the structures. Sound travels in waves through the air and is funneled into the ear by the auricle. Then through the external auditory meatus to the tympanic membrane, which vibrates, and then the sound is actually amplified by the malleus, the incus, and the stapes, which then transmit the sound via vibrations to the oval window. And the oval window produces waves in the perilymph of the cochlea. And then these vibrations cause the vestibular membrane and the endolymph to vibrate, and this causes displacement of the basilar membrane, which is detected by hairs in the spiral organ, and then the hair cells become bent and cause the action potential to be created. Review those steps. You don't need to know a whole lot of detail, but it is important to know those steps, and that it is the bending, actual bending of the hair cells that cause the action potential to be created. And then this shows you diagrammatically what occurs. Sound waves coming in the tympanic membrane, causing these bones to vibrate, causing vibrations in the oval window, and then moving these sensations until finally hair cells are bent, we could say, and then this is transmitted via nerve impulses. Our ears are also important for the sensation of balance or equilibrium. Two types of equilibrium. Static equilibrium is associated with the vestibule, and this responds to the position of the head, evaluates the position of the head relative to gravity. Dynamic equilibrium is associated with the semicircular canals and evaluates changes in direction and the rate of head movement. Why the movement of the head? Well, because this is where all of these structures, the structures of the middle and inner ear, are located. This talks about the vestibule and the inner ear and the maculae. These also contain hair cells and little stones. Literally, otolith means hearing stone, suspended in gelatinous substance that moves in response to gravity. They act as weights in the gelatinous mass, and the entire mass is attached to hair cell microvilli, which initiate the action potential. So again, we have hair cells that trigger this action potential. Here is an example of the vestibule in maintaining balance. Up in your upper left shows you the endolymph in the utricle, and what happens in the right hand diagram at the top when you bend your head in relationship to gravity. The force of gravity causes movement and will allow you to detect the position of your head. And here is the location and structures of the macula. Semicircular, so that was static equilibrium. Here is dynamic equilibrium, and it can allow us to detect sense of movement in any direction. And this shows you some of the structures that are involved at the base of the semicircular canal and what these structures are. Notice that the cupula contains microvilli, and they float and are displaced by the movement of endolymph. So it's this bending of the microvilli which cause us to perceive the sensation of movement. Here are the structures. Take a look at these and try to visualize them all put together. The important, let's say, functional units right here are the hair cells with their microvilli, which detect the movement of the fluid endolymph. And here, as a final little diagram, is a young woman on the balance beam, and of course she is very much stimulating her semicircular canals. So this was an overview of the hearing and balance, that our regulated sensations are perceived, received by our ears for hearing and equilibrium balance. And please review and ask me any questions you may have. And this is the end of the narrations for special senses for HO150.